Good morning. So today we're up to Daf Ayin Test. We learned a stira in Rabbi Yehuda. What led to today's Gemara was a chiddush that Rish Lakish said. Rish Lakish said, if someone eats kazayis of pigel with a kazayis of noiser together, he doesn't get malchus for either one because it's inevitable that the two kazayim got somewhat mixed together, and some of the noiser must have joined the pigel, and some of the pigel must have joined the noiser. Now, if a little bit of noiser joined the pigel, it will be bottled the pigel, and now the noiser will be missing its kazayas. So since that's possible that it happened during the Asra, the Edom tell them don't eat that, otherwise you'll have malchus because of pigel, or don't eat it because you might get malchus because of noiser. That's Asra suffer. The Gemara said that in order for Rish Lakish's psak to develop, there has to be three components to the psak that Rish Lakish must agree to, that combined create a scenario that this would not get malchus. Item number one, of course, is Asra Safek Laf Shmasra. Item number two is that Isser can be bottled on Isser. You might think that Bittel means that Isser will be bottled on Heter. If the Heter overwhelms the Isser, this was bottled. But Isser in Isser, who said that can be bottled? Rish Lakish must hold that it could be bottled. And the third assumption, the Gemara challenges. The third assumption is that Tam Iker is Lav Daraisa. Because even if you don't have a full kazayas of Isser, in whichever one there was a kazayas, there would also be a Tam of the other item. If Tam Iker was Daraisa, then anyway, you would be able to give malchus because it wouldn't be asrosov. Right off the bat, the Gemara rejected that. The Gemara said that if you have a matzah that's made out of a roiv rice and a mute of chitin, if it merely tastes like chitin, your makai mitzvah achilas matzah. So clearly, tam ki'iker is the rice. So we have to change Rish Lakish's halacha that if a kazayis of pigel and the kazayis of noiser get mixed together, it will be bottled. That's only if it's min b'mina. And the Gemara suggests that by min b'mina is Rish Lakish, a regular roiv will be mevatel iser. However, by min b'sheni minoi, there it's betam. There you would need a bittul b'shisha. The Gemara probed Rabbi Yehuda's shita, and we found a contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Rabbi Yehuda said, when it comes to toiveling a dli, Rabbi Yehuda said clearly that if there was if there was chalav or white wine in the dli, that would be a problem for the tefillah. And you have to look at it as if it's red wine. And when you toivel it, you have to see if there would be no red tinge, then you know it's all water. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda clearly says over here that even min b'minoi, even though they're the same color of white, you still need to know that there's no visible portion left of the wine, if it was red, to be able to make it mine. The Rabbanan said the mere roiv is enough. So in that brayse, it's quite clear that Rabbi Yehuda says that even min b'mina needs a roiv. The Gemara asked a kasha from another brayse, which the Gemara attributes to Rabbi Yehuda, because the brayse by Meiraglayim, if someone is toiveling, if a keli that has Meiraglayim inside it, the brayse says royin, you look at it as if it's water. So once it uses that term, that vernacular, that is commonly used by Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara says this brisa must be Rabbi Yehuda. And the brisa says that if you had water of a paraduma in a keli and you wanted to toivel it, it's enough if there is just a rive. So the problem is we have a stira. By the mechatas, Rabbi Yehuda said a rive is enough. Yet by toiveling the deli, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to make believe it was red, and you have to make sure there's no red left. Zok the Gemara, and that's what we ended off with yesterday, is Hadi de Hadarabe. Rabbi Yehuda himself holds that min b'mina is bottle in a simple rive, just as we learned by the Meik Paraduma that was in the Keli. However, that brisa earlier, where Rabbi Yehuda says, even by min b'mina, you look at it as if it's min b'shena mina, and you need to make sure that there's no drop of red left there. That's not his shita. That's the shita of his Rebbe, who's machmer. And Rashi points out that his Rebbe is machmer, that a true min b'mina is not bottle ever. And even a min b'shena mina, if it looks alike, would still need to be mavatal it, because you look at it as if it was min b'shena mina. The Tanya, and now the Gemara is going to illustrate this Chomer de Keshita of the Chacham that we just said is the author of one of the brises quoted by Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, Mishum Rabbi Gamliel, the name of Rabbi Gamliel. Ein dam mevatel dam. Never will dam be mevatel dam. Where is that relevant? So Rashi, Eitzel Zrika, Beitzel Kisui. By Kisui Adam, you can have an overwhelming amount of dam behema, which is not chayiv in Kisui Adam, but if there's a little bit of dam chaya or dam oif mixed in, you'd still be mechayiv in Kisui Adam. Same thing with Zrika. If you have two damim, one's chayiv Zrika, one's not, the one that's chayiv Zrika will never be bought. Or as we had in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur, where you had the dam of the sheep that was mixed in with the dam of the ox, severely overwhelmed by the dam of the ox. Ein dam mevatel dam. Okay, zog to Gemara weiter. Ein roik mevatel roik. Saliva will not be mevatel saliva. Where would that be relevant? So to Rashi, the ein roik hatohar mevatel roik hazov. What if you have the saliva of azov, which is metama, someone who touches it or who carries it, but it was overwhelmed with the saliva of a whole bunch of other people? That doesn't help. Roik will not be mevatel roik. Peter Sturm told me yesterday that there was a type of keli. I forgot the name of the keli, but there's a keli in China where people sometimes have to spit up. So there's a keli that's designed that everybody spits up into. So if you had such a keli that a zov spit up into, and many other people spit up into, you won't say that the saliva of the zov is bottle, and therefore it always remains b'tumasai. And the ein meraglaim, mevatla meraglaim, once again, Rashi says, ve'ein meraglaim taharim, mevatla meraglaim shel zov, and therefore umatame il umatama, even though there's much more meraglaim that's tar in that container. Okay, Gavaltik. Rav Amar. So that is the Chachamim who holds min b'mina is not bottle at all. So therefore, as on the Chachamim, even if it's min b'sheni min, if it looks the same way, like milk and water or white wine and water, you'll need to make believe like the wine, the foreign object is red, and you have to see how much water it would take to overwhelm. Rav Amar, Rav said, you don't need to say that we have a steer in Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, they're both the same Rabbi Yehuda. So then you're going to ask me, how could you explain why in one place by min b'mina a simple rive was enough, like by the mechatos, yet by the dli it needed more? Rav Amar b'dli shetoichay tar v'gavei tamei eskinan. You know, when Rabbi Yehuda is mekel and hold a simple rive of water on the inside of the dli is enough. That's speaking where the whole tumah of the dli was only a tumah d'Rabbanan. There's a tumah d'Rabbanan that says that if you have a keli and mashkin touches the outside of the keli, it's only tamei midrabanan. So we know there's a halacha that when mashkin becomes tamei, it automatically goes back to becoming a rishon. That's a derabbanan. That a mashkin, when it becomes tummy, it automatically goes back to become a tummy rishon. So we have another example that if mashkin touches a keli, even on the outside, it's metama only the outside of the keli. It's not metama the inside of the keli. It's not metama its handles, or its loops, different handles, different style handles they had. It's only metama the outside of the keli, not the inside. So the case over here was where the outside of the keli was tamei, the inside of the keli was not tamei, and it had mechatas inside. So all you need to do really is to get the water to overflow the top rim of the keli. The inside of the keli is really in Gans and Tar. The inside of the keli, where you find the mechatos, is Tar. You need to lower the keli into the mikveh enough that the walls on the outside are covered, they're submerged in water, and the top surface of the rim, which is considered part of the outside, has to also have water on it, which means you have to pull it beneath the surface so that water should overflow it. But you only need a mashahu of water to overflow it. The problem that you have over here is that mechatos is very, very valuable. No one's going to want to dip their keli in deep so that water should overwhelm the mechatos, because it's the loss of a very expensive mechatos. So we're afraid that someone who's toiling this keli will not submerge it below the water enough to have the water overflow its top, to make sure that the top had a tefillah. And because of that, they made a gzera that you're going to have to completely submerge it in water. So Zokt Rava, Amar B'Delisha Toicha Itar V'Gabe Tamei Askina. The Medina Meikra Din even Midrabanan Sagiluhu B'Cholduhu. You just need a tiny bit of water to come over the rim. But for Rabbanan to Gazribu, the Rabbanan said, you got to table even inside of the keli. Why? Because we're afraid Dil Machayis Alayu V'Loi Miftale. They're afraid that when you make this tefillah, you're going to be very careful, and you're not going to make sure that water overflows your rim. Because of that, they said you have to title inside of the keli too. So there's no way you're going to be salvaging this mechatos. You might as well just submerge the whole keli. But you don't really need tefillah on the inside. It's only to make sure that there's a good tefillah on the outside. So therefore, v'chivan the ikaribuya, once there's only a roiv of water on the inside, we've served our purpose already, and we know for sure the water has overflowed the rim, and therefore lo tzarach. But they're all the prices are going according to Rabbi Yehuda. Beautiful. Amar Rava said, Amar Rabbanan b'taima. There are certain scenarios where the Rabbanan said that we have to make sure that there's no taste left, right? We know something called tam ki ikar, and until there's no taste left, you're not going to say it's bought. The Amar Rabbanan Baruba, and then there are those cases where the Rabbanan say that a simple roif will be Mavatal Isser. The Amar Rabbanan Bechazus, and there are certain places where the Rabbanan said you have to make sure that there is no visible trace of the remaining Isser. As Rashi says, if you have Isser and Heter that there's nothing to taste in it, the whole question is its look. Kagoin the Indian tefillas mikveh, right? The mikveh doesn't matter what it tastes like; it's all a matter of what the mikveh looks like. So there, you look at the chazusa, you look to see to make sure that the water looks like water and not like wine. Zogt Rava weiter. Min b'she'enei minoi. If you have min b'she'enei minoi, you have one min mixed into another min. B'taima, you have to make sure that it's going to be bottled to the point that you don't taste the iser in the heather. Min b'minoi. If it's a straight case of min b'minoi, beruba, you go basarayv. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Heicha, the ika chazusa. I should take it back. That's Rabbi Yehuda. If you hold that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing with his Rebbe, but according to Rava, held Rabbi Yehuda holds even by min b'minoi, you need to be mevatel the Mara, so this wouldn't be correct. Min b'mina would be baruba, and heicha the ika chazusa. And when the question is what it looks like Rashi mentioned, like in a mikveh, b'mara, the color of the liquid is what's going to be important. Upligo de Rabbi Elazar. But Rav is arguing on Rabbi Elazar. The Omer Rabbi Elazar, kishem she'ein mitzvahs mevatloi zuasu. Just like one mitzvah could never be mevatla another mitzvah, and we will see in just a moment what that means. Kach ein yisurin mevatlim zuasu. So too yisurin will not be mevatl zuasu. So Rish Lakish told us that pigel can be bottle and noiser, and noiser can be bottle and pigel. He argues in Rabbi Elazar, who holds, yes, Isser can be bottle and heter, but a heter mitzvah dvar mitzvah can't be bottle in the dvar mitzvah, and the Isser can't be bottle in Isser. Man shamis lei damer ein mitzvah mevatel zuasu, which Tana holds that ein mitzvah is mevatel zuasu. Zog Gemara Hill, it's the famous hill of Zecher, Lemikdash, Kehillel, Keinas Hillel, Bismansa Beis Hamikdash Kayim, Hayakoyach Pesach, Matzah Umara, Eichlin Biyachad. Like it says in the pasuk, Al Matzah Yisumaroyim Yechlu. The Tanya Amr of Al Hillel Azokin, Sheyakarchan Bibasachas Va'eichlin, Mishum Shenemer Al Matzah Yisumaroyim Yechlu. So what does this have to do with ein mitzvah mevatlas mitzvah? Zot Rashi, the bottom line of Rashi, v'lo'osi tamor u'mavata leila tamasa. You don't say that the strong flavor of the mor will drown out the flavor of the matzah, and he's not mekayim mitzvah matzah in this fashion. Rather, he is. Now, Tosfos asks what seems to be the obvious question, all the way at the bottom of the Amid, small little Tosfos. Amr alav al Hillel shayakarchan b'vasachas. So Tosfos bisman abayis. This was what the Beis Hamikdash was standing. Sheshloshta daraisa, where all three mitzvahs were daraisa. The time of Tosfos, uminal under kasavar eight mitzvahs b'vatlei zuasu. How do you know that that's what he holds? Dilma hayulakech harbe mikol echad ve'echad. Maybe there was a lot of each one of the three mitzvahs, Pesach, Matzah, Mar. There wouldn't be a bittul if there was a lot. I mean, I know even when I eat koyach, sometimes you're biting into the matzah where there's a big chunk of lettuce or a big chunk of ground mur or whatever it is you use for mur. And some places the mur is spread thinner, so that you're tasting the matzah. So if there's a lot of each, it's likely that there is no bittul anyway. So what is the raya from Hillel that ein heter, a mitzvah mevatel mitzvah? But that's what the Gemara says. About Hillel ein mitzvah mevatel mitzvah, Rabbi Elazar says who in that principle should be applied to ein iser mevatel iser. Let's sit on top of the page. Tanu Rabbanan. Charson shel zov v'zava. Now, a charson zot Rashi is an ovet shel meiraglayim, a container that's used for meiraglayim, v'nishbar, and it broke. Now, we know cheres is very absorbent; it absorbs whatever is in it. So v'nishbar, v'charasa bolu mimeiraglayim hazovim, the shards of clay of this ovet shel meiraglayim are saturated with meiraglayim of the zavatuma, and therefore behein mitam and b'masa. If you merely carry the broken clay shard of this keli, it's as if you're carrying the meiraglayim of a zav, and you become tummy. Sha'af pi shenivlu, even though the meiraglayim is absorbed, not be'en tmeim, they're still tummy. Kiditnan b'meseches kelim. Like we learned in the Mishnah in Kalim, Umaisi Labi Gemara the Nida, it's also quoted in the Gemara of Nida. Charson Shabalu Mashkin Tveim. The Mishnah tells us that if a shard of cheres was absorbed with Mashkin Tveim, such as Meiraglayim of Azov, the Naflula Aver Tanir, and the piece of cheres fell into the aver of a tanner, we know the aver of a tanner becomes tame if there is tame submerged within its walls, as there is now with this piece of clay that's absorbed tuma. The halacha is hataner tame. The tanner is tame. You know why? Shesoif mashke lotzes behesek hataner. As soon as you heat up that oven, that mashke is going to drain out of that shard. So we look at it as if there's mashke be'en. So moving on in our brayso, Tanu Rabbanan, Chayzon Shozov Bezova, Pam Risha and Visheni Tame. The first two times that you rinse it off, it's going to be Tame because there's still enough content of Meraglayim absorbed into it that there's a critical mass that will be Tame. As Rashi says, Shadain loy poltu mi Meraglayim shaboy. They still have not yet given off, secreted all of the meraglayim that's inside it, and of course meraglayim is aser, is tummy, that is. So b'medvar mamurim, but shlishi tahar, the third time you rinse it out, by the third time you've already extracted the meraglayim, and therefore the shard is no longer considered tummy because it's no longer considered to contain to contain a mashke tmeya that soifoi watches. Zog to Gemara, Amed Devar Mamurim. When do we say that the meraglayim, the tumah, was diluted out? Shanosan l'soichinai. That's if you were rinsing it in water. After the third time, we'll say it's sort of drowned out or flushed out. But if it wasn't water that you flushed it out, rather you flushed it out with min b'minoi, you flushed it out with meraglayim, but that was tahar, afilu asiri tame. Even if you rinsed it out 10 times in meraglayim, that's tahar, we say that the tumah remains in the klicheres, must be because min b'minoi le'botl, she tells us. Okay? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Shlishi, the third time, no, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds min b'minoi is botl. If you rinse it out 3 times in meraglayim, that's tahar, the shard becomes tahar. Right here, Tosfos jumps right in, the second Tosfos, and tells us, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Mikan Raya l'Rabbeinu Tam. This is proof positive to the conclusion of Rabbeinu Tam, the min b'minoi botl, because we're quoting the halacha min b'minoi botl from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Kaimalon we know, Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanoki. It's concise and it's clear, and therefore we pass. We pass like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov because his Mishnahs have precise accuracy, and therefore we pass that min b'minoi is going to be botl. Who is the Tana who holds min b'minoi le'botl? Rabbi Yehuda. It must be Rabbi Yehuda, which explains why even with a min b'sheni minoi, if they look alike, you need to eliminate the mara. But we have a kasha. Pishton shetavasai nida. If a woman spun pishton, now when women spin things, they moisten their fingers with their saliva and then twist the yarn with it, they twist the wool with it, because it needs that moisture. So now you have wet saliva of a nida, which is tameh, that's absorbed into this pishtan. So therefore, masite tahar. If someone moves that pishtan, it's going to be tahar. Why? Because we'll say that if it's after a while, that saliva has already dried up, and the saliva is only metama b'magu v'masa while it's still moist. However, if you move pishtan that was still moist from the saliva of the nida, then masite tama. Why? Mishum mashke piha, because of the mashke that comes out of her mouth, which is also tame, as Rashi says, Mesite Tame Sharoik Halach Metame B'mas. Gewaltig. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, Af Haroitvai B'mayim Tame. Even if the saliva of the woman in the pishton has already dried up, but you re-moisten the wool yarn with water, the water will reawaken the saliva and it will become tummy. Mishumash kapia, va'afilu tuva, even if there's a lot of it. So you know what you see from here? That even if you washed out this yarn multiple times in water, the water will never be mevatel, the saliva, because we consider that min b'minoi and it will never be bought. Let's have a look at Rashi. This is where in the Tosefta of Maseches Tires, and Rashi explains, even if you moisten the wool, the yarn, after it was dried out already, nevertheless, the roik becomes moist again because it absorbs the water. V'tamei mishamash kapia, there will still be tamei. But the key point is vafilu tuva, afilu kavsoi pa'amim harbe ka'amar tamei. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say alpha right of my is tamei only up to the first time, second time, third time. Rabbi Yehuda says it unlimited, meaning no matter how many times you might have rinsed out this yarn in water, it continues to reignite the moisture of the saliva, and therefore this yarn becomes tamei. So you see, min b'minei Omar Papa, you don't have a right in that case because shiny roik dekar. Roik isn't like water. If it was two minim that were the same, in fact, maybe he would agree that it would be considered muvutal. But roik is very viscous. Rashi says, nichnas bepishton b'chazok, it's viscous, it's sticky. When it goes into something, it adheres to it. The kosher lotzes, it's much harder to get it out. That's why Rabbi Yehuda is mach. Avol meir raglayim loy beli becheres kulahai. But Avad Rabbi Yehuda would agree by meir raglayim, which is just like regular water, that it would be bought. Zok the Gemara of Hayt. The Mishnah says this arv b'dam apsulim. If the dam of your kosher carbon got mixed in with dam of apostle carbon, even though you could be mavatal the dam of the psulim, or even though according to Rabbi Eliezer and dam mavatal dam, or who knows in dam mavatal dam, it's yishafech lam. What is the machlokes? Because we had the Mishnah says yishafech lama, but Rabbi Eliezer there said you can use it. So what's the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Tanakam in our Mishnah? Whether in this Nisar B'dam Apsul Yishavech La'ama. There's also another case that the Mishnah brought, if it was Nisar B'dam Atamtzes. So B'makam Efagi. Amr Abzvid, you know what the machlokes is? V'goyzin Gzeira B'mikdash. There is a good reason to make a Gzeira to say that if it was mixed with Dam Psulim, it should be possible. The question is, B'chalal, do you make Gzeiros in the Beis HaMikdash? Maybe the Beis HaMikdash is not a place where you make Gzeiros. The Marishaber Goyzer, the Tanakam holds Goyzer in. Rebelezer and Marishaber Loy Goyzer. Why would there be a Gzeira? What's the problem if it was mixed with Dam Psulim? So Rashi tells us what the potential problem is. Now, first Rashi says, the reason not to be Goyzer Gzeira B'Mikdash is because you're being mafsid kachim. You technically have good kachim that you could be Zerek to Dam, because if you're Gzeira, we're going to end up passing the carbon. You don't do that. What is the Gzeira here? Tanakam Savar Goyzer. Zokt Rashi, 2 lines up in the skinny lines of Rashi. Hilach Nis'arav Dam Kosher B'Dam Posel. If Dam Kosher got mixed with Dam Posel, or B'Dam Atamtzis, or it got mixed with Dam Atamtzis, which is the other case in the Mishnah where the Chacham say it's Posel, and you should pour down the Amma. Even though there's not enough of this unqualified dam to be mevatel the kosher dam, so you should still be able to make this rika. Nevertheless, yishafech lama, spill it all out. Why? Gzeira dilma osi lachshuri nami heicha diyesh b'dam apostle oy b'dam atamtus kidei levatel es kosher. we're afraid that if we'll allow you to use this dam when it's not bottle, we're afraid you'll use it even if it would be bottle. And that's why there's a need to answer this dam. Now, Rashi asks, so why dafka by dam atamtis? Why dafka by dam posel? What about the sar b'dam behema or b'dam chaya? Zot Rashi, because mishum dechulin ba'azara lo yishchich. It's not likely that dam of a carbon in the base of mikdash in the azara will get mixed into dam of an animal of chulin, because chulin animals are never found inside the azara. It would be an extremely unusually rare case. But dam psulim, there's many times where psulim occur in karbanis, even with kayanim's reason. Psulim occur, and therefore that's something that's more common, and that's why they want it to be gosher over there. So that's what the Tanakam holds. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you don't make a gzera to base hamikdash because you're being mafsid. Beautiful. Rav Papa wanted to argue, and he said the chula alma gosher. Even Rabbi Eliezer holds you do make a gzera by hektish. V'hacha here bedama tamtzis motzi l'rabis al dama nefesh kebif. Rabbi Eliezer for sure. Rabbi Eliezer for sure agrees with the Isser of Dam Psulim. Rabbi Eliezer is only arguing on one halach of the Mishnah, the Dam Tamtzis got mixed in. And the machlekes is, if it's common that Dam Tamtzis should be more than the Dam Nefesh, Mar Sover Shchiach, one man of those that happens quite often, which is the Tanakama, therefore there's a need to make the Gzera. Mar Sover Lo Shchiach, and the other Madamar says it's not a common thing. Now, in order to understand the next couple of lines, we really need to go back and look at the Mishnah. So I think that is on Ayin Ches Amid Beis. So I'm going to go back there for a second. No, I have to go back to Ayin Ches Amid Aleph. I'm sorry. Okay, so right at the top of Ayin Ches Amid Aleph, we have this machlekes quoted. Nis'ar b'dam psulim yishavech la'ama, b'dam atamtzis yishavech la'ama. Rabbi Eliezer machshir. So let me ask you a question. Looking at this Mishnah, that's what it reads. When Rabbi Eliezer is machshir, is he only machshir by the last case dam atamtzis, or is he also machshir by nis'ar b'dam psulim? Now, if he argues in both cases, really what the Mishnah should have said is, in one case, nis'ar b'dam psulim oy b'dam atamtzis, according to the Chachamim Yishavech La'ama, and Rabbi Eliezer Machshir. From the fact that the Mishnah splits the cases up, it seems to indicate that everybody agrees if it was Nis'ar B'dam Psulim is Yishavech La'ama, but Dam Atamtzis, the Chachamim say Yishavech La'ama, and Rabbi Eliezer argues and is Machshir. So Zakra Papa, I believe that Rabbi Eliezer holds, just like the Chachamim, that you could make a Gzera in the base of Mikdash. And I agree with you that this Ar B'dam Psulim, you make the Gzera, and it's Yishavech La'ama. I'm just disagreeing with you by Dam Atamtis whether there's really a need to make a Gzera. I hold that since it's so unlikely that there'll be a lot of Dam Samsas, enough to overwhelm the Dam HaNefesh, I don't think there's a need to make this Gzera. So let's go back to where we're holding, which is Ayin Tes Amud Beis. So Zok to Gemara, Zok Rav Papa, the Chula Alma Goyzrit, V'acha B'dam Atamtis Motzi L'Rabbis Al Dam HaNefesh Kamif. Mar Sover Shchiach, the Tanakama holds it Shchiach, and therefore we need to be Geyser. Umar Sover and Blazos Lo Shchiach. Zokma B'Shlomo Rav Papa makes sense why the Mishnah separates the two cases. Hani the Katoni Nizar B'dam Psulim Yishavech La'ama, and then B'dam Atamtis Yishavech La'ama. El Reb Zvid LeRavina V'Lisninu. According to Reb Zvid, where Reb Eliezer is arguing on both cases, why didn't the Mishnah present itself as one case? Everything Gemara kasha. No, you have a kasha. Zok Gemara weiter. Dam Timimim B'dam Balei Mumin. If the dam of Karbonis that were Tamim got mixed into the dam of a Balmum, Yishavech Lama, again, we're all down to Kois B'Koisos. What if it wasn't mixed together in one keli? Rather, there was a bunch of kalim, each one was holding dam of one carbon, but one of these carbonoids, one of these kalim holds the dam of a balmum. So what do you do there? Rabbi Lezer in karev koisechot, Rabbi Lezer shita, if you already wrongfully spritzed the dam of one kois, even though that might have been the dam of a balmum, but once you've done that, then you could blame the psul on that first kois, and you could continue to make the zrikas damim of the other koises. Yikavu kol koisos, and we learned Rabbi Lazar says that's only two at a time. So you also have a migui that's sure one of these two koises are kosher. Even if you were already makriv all the dam except for one, and we learned earlier one pair, yishafech la'amo, you still have to pour it out because he disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that your title the apostle is the one that was done already. What about anitnin lamata? Shenis arvu benitnin lamayla. We know the dam of a chatas has to be spritzed lamayla mechut asikra on the karnish of the mizbeach. The oila have to spritz the lower part of the mizbeach. What if the dam got mixed together? How do you deal with it? Rabbi Eliezer Omer yitin lamayla. You can spritz the dam lamayla. And v'roya aniyas etachtoinin milamayla, the dam that should not be spritzed lamayla, that I spritzed there because of the suffix, you look at it kilo mayim. You don't look at it like a zrika, you look at it like it's mine. So he's saying when he spritzes, if it is the dam that needs to be spritzed there, then that's what I want to do. If it's not the dam that needs to be spritzed there, treat it like water. The yachshav yitin lamata, and then to be yoytzed the zrika that has to be done lamata, he should then do this zrika lamata from the blood. No, you shavech la'ama. You spill it. This is disqualified. What if someone didn't ask a shaila? V'nosan, and he spritzed the blood according to the Chachamim? Kosher, it'll be kosher because Lamaisa, they still made Zrika. Now, this is the longest Mishnah, but let's see if we could get it finished. Hanitnin b'matona achas. Shenis arvu b'nitnin b'matona achas. If you had the dam of a bechor, for instance, that was mixed with the dam of a meiser, they both need just one matnas dam. Doesn't make a difference of Rashi if two koises got confused or if they're both mixed in the same kois. No problem. You spritz it the way both korbanos have to be spritzed, and you're going to be good. How about matan arba, matan arba? What if it's two korbanos that each needed matan arba? Rashi says it's referring to shtei matana and shein arba, such as that's required by an oila and a shlomim or an asham. So then you do the same thing. You must have been matan arba because it'll satisfy the requirements of both domim. What about matan arba but matan achas? What do you do there? You must have been matan arba. You could still do matan arba. And you look at the extra matanos on behalf of the carbon that only need one matana, like it's mayim, and we won't consider that to be bal toisif. Rabbi Shuaimer, no, you must have been matana achas, because then there's a problem of bal toisif. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer, harei you over al bayal sigra. If you're only going to spritz one, you're going to be over a pasuk that says that don't reduce from the mitzvah. The Torah gives you a mitzvah, you have to do it to its fullest. You can't minimize it. The pasuk to quote is it's here at the bottom, or is it here at the bottom? Oh, no, maybe it's later on. But there's a pasuk that says that you should not reduce from the mitzvah. You have to do the mitzvah to its fullest. So you might say I have a problem with Bal Taisa, but you have a problem with Bal Sikra. Zog to Gemara. So he responded back, I'm going to be sure I have a Bal Taisa. But your way, you're going to be able to Bal Taisa. Amalei Lezer, loy nemer Bal Taisa ela keshu ba'atzma. You know when there's Bal Taisa, the pour extra dam, that's if there's no need to. Because it's not an asafik. You stop adding extra matanos, that's not allowed. But here we have a good, compelling reason to do so, because it got mixed in with other blood, and we want to be yoy to the other blood. Amalei Rabbi Shua, loy nemer le Bal Sigra ela keshu ba'atzma. You know when you're not allowed to put one matana instead of four matanas? That's if there's no suffix. You know it needs four matanas, but here it's a suffix. The Adam Rabbi Yeshua, Kishanesata, if you're going to put 4 matanos, Avarta al Baltoisif, you'll be over Baltoisif, but Vasisa Maisi Biyotcha. You did a Maisi be dying to be over an Aveir. That's worse. But Kishaloinazata, by not putting on 4 matanos only 1, you're right. You were over Balsigra for the carbon that needed 4 shrikas. But Asisa Maisi Biyotcha, you did an Aveir b'Shev al Tasa. If you're going to do an Aveir, better do it b'Shev al Tasa and not be'amoid vasei. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were to finish the Mishnah, and Be'Hashem tomorrow we will learn Daf Samach. I'm sorry, Daf Pei. I don't think I'm going to make it back to Toronto for tomorrow because there's supposed to be a big snowstorm today, a nor'easter. They even declared an emergency. What's it called? They declare an emergency. They want people on the roads today. We have Sheva Brachas this afternoon in Muncie. We're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not we should cancel it. Even though my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law prepared, because to make people drive out in treacherous weather, I don't think that's a good idea.
How much are they expecting?
They're only expecting like 1 or 2 centimeters, but it's supposed to be freezing rain.
Oh, boy.
So freezing rain will be a disaster on the highways.
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
Yes, go ahead.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.